Yeah, you hit the button.
Well, tapped, less hit. If I hit it, I would upset the camera. All right. So, Sunshine. Sunshine is a small sci-fi film that came out in 2007 that bombed very hard at the box office. Had a production budget of about 20 million. Estimates go up to about 40 million, factoring in marketing. But it only did, I believe it was about 32 million at the international box office. Did not do well on home video, so by all accounts, a pretty big flop. However, since then and up until now, it seemed to enjoy a pretty strong, not necessarily cult following, but I would refer to it as a cult film. It has its fans, people that love it and still enjoy it. In preparation for this video, I hadn't seen it before. I watched it 3 times in the space of about a week and enjoyed it more each time I watched it. So it definitely has its fans, and one more recent fan, and even those who are off put by the jarring third act, which seems to be the thing it's most known for. It still has a lot of, we're not supporters, but a lot of people who enjoy it. So figured that would be a good one to talk about. It seems to come up pretty regularly on the like Critical Drinker stream. People will recommend him doing a video on that fairly often. I don't remember if he has, but at least it gets talked about with some regularity. So we figured there was some interest, and that would be a good one to talk about.
No, he actually did do a video.
He did? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A short one, like 6 minutes or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, outside of the live streams, I don't catch much beyond that, other than some of the reviews.
Maybe
But
you call yourself a fan.
Do I though?
So the cast.
Yeah. So
Let's start there.
Yeah. First off, the cast. So it had a few. I don't know if you'd call them stars at the time, but people that were definitely at the time less popular than they are now. Michelle Yeoh and Hiroyuki Sanada had a pretty solid international following. Had been in some martial arts films. Let's see, at this point, Hiroyuki Sanada had been in Last Samurai, which is the first film I had seen him in. Michelle Yeoh had been in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and then
Tomorrow's Not Enough, and a lot of other ones.
Tomorrow's Not yeah. So haven't seen a lot of movies with either of them in it, but they were decent international stars at this time, but have just continued to gain in popularity, and rightly so. They're both fantastic actors, with Michelle Yeoh taking home the Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once this year.
Chris Evans.
Chris Evans, yeah, he'd first got popularity from it was Not Another Teen Movie. I think that was the one. I think I thought it was American Pie, but it's Not Another Teen Movie. And he was a couple of years ago had gotten more popularity as the Human Torch in Fantastic Four. But he's definitely a much larger star. Currently post Marvel, and funnily enough, same thing for BD Wong. Although not a star as much involved in the Marvel universe. Solid actor, good in this role. I don't believe I've seen him in much, if anything else. I heard other movies he appeared in, but definitely due to Marvel a much larger name now than previously. Let's see. Cillian Murphy, obviously, it's got Peaky Blinders, Scarecrow, and a lot of things. Just always, he's been one of my favorites ever since Scarecrow. Just you can always count on him for a really solid performance, even if he's not like as much of a household name as some of the other actors. And
he did a movie called Red Eye with Rachel McAdams.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
And he had this great, terrifying presence for the first And again, this is another movie that seems to kind of like falter towards the third act because they're on this plane and he's threatening her and she's doing this mental jousting with him, and it's really good stuff. And then they get off the plane and it looks like a 3-foot person is chasing Rachel McAdams, and you lose the terror, it seemed like, in that movie. What are you trying to tell me? Yeah. Okay.
Either sit for it. Weirdly enough, I want you to be heard better. So that's what.
It's so good to be here. Thank you.
Now leave. Yeah, he does really solid as just sort of in this, and 28 Days Later. Like I said, I haven't seen him in all that many things as just like an everyman, just an average guy. He's a physicist in Sunshine, but also plays a damn good villain, like in Red Eye and Scarecrow as well. Doesn't have all that many scenes in Batman Begins, and even fewer in The Dark Knight, but a solid actor. And according to Danny Boyle, the director, Sunshine, just one of the easiest people to get along with ever. Really good to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Cillian Murphy always brings it. It seems like his A game to his work. So
yeah.
But yeah, Chris Evans. I also remember another movie he was in that spiked up his popularity quite a bit. The one where they're on the train and it represents the different classes of humanity. Snowpiercer. Yeah, he starred in that thing back in the day.
Yeah, that was, I want to say 2010, 2011. That was when I got probably a little over halfway through before it started losing my interest.
That's kind of where I made it with that movie too, yeah.
Yeah, I do need to revisit it, but just at the time, not the right movie. Unlike Sunshine, which was the right movie. Let's see, at least initially, names of the other actors are escaping me. There's a couple of other actors. The actors, I remember the characters' names. That would be Searle and Harvey.
And he's in a lot of movies. The guy who played Searle.
Yeah, darn good actor. Spacing on his name, but other two just solid. So I mean, like technically an ensemble cast of just really solid actors performing for the most part without makeup, which is highly unusual.
Well, it's and that was the director's idea too, was to stick them all together, make sure that they had this, whether you want to call it cohesive or at least this exhausted, putting up with each other type of attitude that they had going on. They stayed together for like 4 months, didn't you say, or something like that?
6 weeks. So yeah, in preparation for the film, which, as I mentioned in my John Wick 4 video, and just kind of should be the case universally, but isn't, a solid amount of prep work for this. The cast spent 6 weeks living together in I believe it was a dorm room, living how they would on the ship. Each morning, one of them would prepare food for everybody else. Like we have the scene with BD Wong and Chris Evans towards the beginning of the film where BD Wong is preparing food. So they actually did that. So they got to live together in similar situations and get a rapport like they would have and be accustomed to living like that. And just from we'll get into more of this during the a later portion, but just how the director approached it, it makes it very, it helps the actors act. And the preparation, the living like that. Cillian Murphy he and Brian Cox, I don't know if scientific advisor is I don't remember if that's the proper term for what he was, but the scientific advisor on there, they went to CERN to talk to physicists, and since Cillian Murphy was the physicist in the film, just to help him get a grasp of what his job in the movie would be, and he picked up information that, and this is while they were building the Hadron Collider, or Super Collider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not a science nerd, a nerd in other ways, but yeah, the preparation really shows. You can feel the dynamic between the crew. You can feel the rapport that they've got, and at least for my experience, it really felt like people that were living together for an extended period of time in a small amount of space.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, the space itself, I think that's probably worth discussing because a lot of detail and thought went into this production. I mean, everything from the visuals to how they designed the set.
Yeah.
Michelle Yeoh's character, who is in charge of air quality, air production on the ship, and so she's inside of this room that's got algae going, and it has water like running down the sides of the wall, and like algae stains on stuff, which made it look more real, not this sharp, sterile look that space-esque sci-fi movies tend to develop.
Yeah, the shot of the water running down the side and then trickling in, you had the green on there. Yeah, from a production design standpoint, and this goes hand in hand. Well, I mean, everything goes hand in hand with this film. With the performances, it's just everything felt like you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which really helps the actors. I'll just jump into this since it's on my mind. But Danny Boyle mentioned this in an interview that he did in 2013. He and Brian Cox were participating in a panel with a film critic whose name escapes me, and I'm actually gonna link this in the comments. It's really, or in the description, really worth checking out. A solid hour-ish interview at this festival where they talk about the film. It took place, I believe, 2013 or so is when the conversation happened, but it was relative to Sunshine. So they talk about the physical environment that things take place in. And I'd reference Christian Bale working on Thor: Love and Thunder. He commented he'd move from green screen to green screen and he wouldn't know what scene he was in because it was just, well, this is just a different green room than I was in before. And it's really difficult to act in that scenario. Danny Boyle in the conversation at the festival references like the types of acting you get from people when they're reacting to something that actually isn't there. It's either overacting to try to sell it or underacting because it's not really there. But actually having the cast in the physical environments and minimizing the use of green screen, which I can't really think of any particular thing. It's like, oh, well, that's obviously green screen. I assume there's at least some of that, but they had as much of the set and as many practical effects as possible, which really shows in the characters' performances because it seems like they are actually in the space that they're in as opposed to just surrounded by green reacting to cues.
And it seems to be dating and aging very well, especially for what the money that they claim that they spent. I have a hard time believing based on the look of the film.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Even the high estimate on the budget is 40 million. Danny Boyle in the same interview I referenced said the production budget was 20 million, which I was highly impressed at 40 million. And if you think this came out the same year as Transformers and other films, it was sort of a CGI heavy film year. So this comes out in the middle of that. There's a fair amount of computer generated imagery in it, but as many practical effects as they could practically do, and it really shows. It holds up extremely well. It's not like as shiny and polished as a lot of the big budget CGI films we get nowadays, but it looks far more real, and then it's actual objects in an actual space as opposed to digitally created.
So and it might be worth mentioning a little bit of what's happening in the movie, at least as far as the sun is dying. And so the
synopsis,
and they decided to put together a small, tiny bomb the size of Manhattan, put it behind a giant shield, and fly it into the sun. Which no problems are going to happen from that, of course. And this is the second attempt.
Yeah,
first attempt failed. And then there's a scene where the shield fails, and the captain is in front of the shield, repairing it along with Kappa, Cillian Murphy's character.
Yeah.
That ending bit to that scene was fantastic work, visually and both emotionally. It worked on so many different levels.
Yep. Yeah, that was a very intricate scene from a character's perspective. There's so much. I mean, just that one sequence. We can talk about the writing a little bit. But that one sequence had, I mean, you've got eight characters going on simultaneously, each with their own motivations, each with their own lines interplaying in that, and as well as various other things happening. You have the initial alarm of something's going wrong. You don't know what. You find out that Trey, BD Wong's character, as they've altered their trajectory to try to reach the Icarus 1, they're in the Icarus 2, so they can get so they'll have an option at a second payload as opposed to the first payload they're going to deliver. They don't know if it will actually reignite the sun or not. So their decision making as well, if we rendezvous with the other ship, will have two payloads so that's two chances. And as he makes all the calculations for that, he forgets to alter the angle of the shield, which means a portion of the ship gets damaged because of the angle of approach to the sun. And yeah, that's a really nice touch in that it's not an external thing that happens. It's not a plot contrivance, as it were. It's just in the midst of making a bunch of calculations and double and triple checking the numbers, he just forgets one little detail, which is to adjust the angle of the shield so they're shielded from the very, very intense sunshine. So
it's off by like what was
1.1%. Yeah. And yeah, it's difficult to like talk in sections about this film because everything is connected to everything else. But yeah, just third act aside for the moment, the first over an hour of this film is superbly well written. Very few contrivances, everything very organic, very character motivated, extremely consistent across everything from beginning to end. Characters act how they are, interact in ways that may make sense and stay consistent, even in things that seem to be somewhat. One scene in particular is in the sequence we're talking about where or Kappa and Kaneda end up going out to fix the 4 panels that have come loose because of the wrong angle of approach to the sun. You've got Mace volunteering Kappa, or Chris Evans' character Mace volunteering Kappa to go as sort of a little bit of revenge for they had the fight earlier because Kappa and sending a message home took too long, so then Mace didn't get to send a message home right as they went out of radio or radio or before they could stop sending information. And they have a bit of a fight over it, and Mace apologizes, but this is a little jab back.
And Mace is always this cool and fully logical character. There's a female character, one of only 2 on the ship, and she's this more human-based, human emotions, and more about doing sometimes the morally correct thing, if not the logically sound thing. Whereas Chris Evans' character was the complete opposite to it.
Yeah, you're referring to Cassie Roseburne's character?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It doesn't have all that many lines and doesn't per se make that many decisions, but a solidly well written character with sufficient motivation to give weight to the things she says.
But back being on the shield.
Yeah.
So they're busy fixing it, and the ship's computer says, "Bad news, guys. I have to take over and readjust the shield and put it back in front of fully in front of the sun. Otherwise, the whole ship is going to explode."
Yeah.
So the ship is busy doing that, and the captain's like, "Okay, I can get this done, but I'm not going to make it off of here." Cyril, the psych officer, who in the one of the very first scenes is busy staring at the sun from this observation room. And that's where he spends most of his time. The psych officer is obsessing.
Yeah, he is a really fascinating character because he's a psych officer and is in charge of maintaining the sanity of everyone else on board. But he's also the one most preoccupied with the sun and spends a large amount of time in the viewing room and like, pushes the boundary on viewing that. And throughout his dialogue, that stays consistent. The scene after that, when they're at breakfast, he talks about like being immersed in light, or difference between light and darkness. Light is or darkness is an absence of something, and you kind of float in it. But then light is different, and you
Full
just
immersion.
get immersed in it, which is fascinating and or is perfectly in keeping with his line when Kaneda makes the decision to stay out and fix the fourth panel, knowing he's not going to be able to make it to the edge of the shield and get to safety in time, as the ship is automatically course correcting to be completely shielded. Again, the Icarus's AI, given that a fire broke out in the oxygen farm, is readjusting the trajectory of the ship, which results in Kaneda's death. But even that was a self-sacrificial decision on his part to get the fourth shield fixed, so the mission would have a chance to succeed.
With that epic shot of the firewall coming at the
Yeah.
captain, and he just turns and stares it down. Just to see what it is, and Cheryl's screaming in the background, "What do you see?
What do you see?" Yeah, which is a very odd thing, because like most other people are reacting with, I mean, they're about to lose their captain, but then Chris Evans is the one that the very black and white, well, this is what needs to happen. It's the captain confirms his suggestion of him staying out there to finish closing the last flap, while Kappa gets to safety. But yeah, when everyone else is about to lose their captain, you've got the person in charge of the psychological health of everyone asking, what do you see? What do you see? And he doesn't get an answer, and Kaneda dies, and you like hear his screams as he dies, and
Which was really good sound design on that. It was a very alien sounding. You know,
it was. So, yeah, in the interview with Danny Boyle, he references the sound designer, and this was also the same sound designer for Gravity, which had just come out at the time of the interview, and that won both sound mixing and sound editing Oscars that year, and it should have, because just because I tend to be more sound oriented, the discussion sort of went towards sound design and just sound in general. And Danny Boyle quoted someone just saying like there is no light without sound. Sound design is incredibly important, as this film shows beautifully. It had a phenomenal sound design. And
the music.
Yeah, music as well. That's referenced in other videos that I watched on this, or in my words, it's an okay score, but it's a fantastic soundtrack. It's not particularly complicated, but the chord progressions they use are very evocative. It's in one sense really simplistic, so it's not this brilliant composition, but it is extremely effective.
It matches the tone of what they were going for in the movie perfectly.
So,
and it was the same guy that did the score for this, who's done, it was stupid, like 5 of Danny Boyle's movies.
Yeah, he's worked with him a lot. You haven't been able to tell so far. I'm sometimes good with names, but mostly not. But yeah, you had, I heard different things on this. I know there was a legal struggle over the rights to the music, and the soundtrack was delayed in its release for about a year, I believe, because of copyright disputes on that. But at least according to Cinema Wins, said the band Underworld composed most of the music, and then the composer added bits here and there. So I'm not sure what the actual case on that was, but whatever the end product was fantastic, and I thought could hardly have been better. It didn't need an elaborate Star Wars-esque soundtrack, or score. It just had a very effective, visceral and emotionally compelling soundtrack.
Mm-hmm. which was perfect, especially with that script, the set design. It was
Yeah.
very cohesive. So
Yeah, and that's prep work. That's a cohesive vision from Danny Boyle. And yeah, he and the screenwriter Alex Garland. So Alex Garland is the only credited screenwriter on it, and it was his spec script that he sold with Danny Boyle attached to direct. But they, for about a year, worked and reworked the script, doing about 35 different drafts on it, and I didn't find too many details on it, but they definitely were in disagreement on a number of things. They were like agreed, according to Alex Garland, on some of the bigger picture things. It's just how to go about that they disagreed on. John Murphy, that was it, the composer. I had John Debney stuck in my head, but yeah, John Debney and Underworld credited composers on there for a superb soundtrack.
yeah, yeah. So and we're going to have to get into this at some point.
Yeah.
The third act.
Third act. So this seems to be where the like points of contention between Danny Boyle and Alex Garland came up. Danny Boyle said in Garland's original script, you have Kappa and Mace playing chess on the payload as it flies into the sun, which is a bit supposed to be metaphorical. Chess is a game of like strategy, somewhat of a like chance element. There's just a tremendous amount of variables, and you make calculated decisions based on the amount of variables and hope that each move you make is correct, which fitted more Garland's vision for the story. But then Boyle wanted more of a, I forget what he said, but that he didn't want it to be like that mathematical. He wanted it to be more human, not necessarily spiritual. But Garland is apparently a pretty staunch atheist and wanted to keep a very atheistic approach to it, and it felt like
Which he did.
Yeah, felt like Boyle was more of the a combination of Danny Boyle and Brian Cox, the scientific advisor, on it. They both had a different approach to that, which it isn't necessarily spiritual. It's just more emotional, less intellectual. It's a more philosophical and emotional, because, as Brian Cox said in the interview, science is essentially driven by emotional reaction. It's a reaction to its awe, its wonder, its fear. It's a very strong emotional compulsion that motivates one to seek out scientific answers. So it's not this cold, calculated approach to exploration. And I do like, or getting back to the third act, the approach that they ended up taking, which is killing Murphy, the physicist, inside his own bomb as it goes off, and he's hurtling into the sun, and time and space start to smear together in a scene that was very well foreshadowed as he's making the decision whether or not they should go to try to get the second payload from the Icarus 1. It's just, there's no way to calculate what's going to happen. You just calculate as much as you can and give it your best shot. So you have him sort of, as the explosion starts to happen, just reaching out to touch the sun. And Boyle liked that as an ending, as opposed to two guys just playing chess. He felt that was more compelling, as this physicist whose everything has been theoretical up to this point, essentially just getting to reach out and touch the sun that he's hurtling into. And as far as like that particular moment, now there's a lot that happens before that. I thought that was, between those two options, a much better way to go.
It seemed like, too, to me, that they covered it to an extent when you had Kappa, who was scientific in nature and trying to, basically keep his head down low as everyone else is doing their job and flying this thing into the sun. And then this decision has to be made. And so they're busy asking Kappa, what do we do? And he's like, science actually doesn't have the answer here. Between all of these variables, it's a crapshoot. So
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah.
So a lot of this movie seemed like to talk about, like, is it science? Is it God? Or is it just man's reaction and trying to deal with things that are so much bigger than they are? Like when
Yeah.
they're looking into the sun, probably my favorite shot in the movie is they call everyone together into this observation room that Cyril's staying in, and he's like, I don't even have words for this, so here you go. And it shows little tiny
Yep.
Mercury floating on by in front
Mercury
of the sun,
passing in front of the sun.
and everyone's just quiet watching this, going, crap.
Yep.
This
Yeah.
is a little dude facing off against this big giant sun, and it makes no sense. But here you are.
It's a planet that's just this little black spot moving across. And then as they get much, when they do the slingshot maneuver around it to alter their trajectory to go to Icarus 1, you see how big the planet is, but it's just this tiny
little speck.
The perspective in this film is, yeah, it's kind of tough to talk about because it's so well interconnected. It's tough to bring up one thing without bringing up a couple other things that it connects to. But even just like the opening shot, you have the Fox Searchlight logo played in reverse that ends on the sun, and then you see the
shield.
Initially think is the sun coming toward, and then as it goes around, you see it's the actual shield, which looks like an eye, and then pans around. It's like, oh, that's the ship, and then the sun is.
And then it shows Cyril's eye. After that
cuts
too.
to,
Then
Yep, close up of the behind the shades. Yeah, we could go on for hours just about the technical brilliance of this film, but
then things go weird on the ship. And
so
this hurt the movie a lot too, because I think when word of mouth got around that they had a villain at the end of this that was and I remember hearing this coined a couple of times, a crazy Christian running around the ship, knifing them, taking them out. The point of it was that this was a character off of the first ship, and he snuck on board,
the
and he's busy
captain.
sabotaging everything because man shouldn't interfere with the fate of man, essentially, or that it's like butting heads with God.
Yeah, for 7 years I talked to God, and he wants me to paraphrase. He wants me to take us all to heaven. So it's essentially, it felt like I don't know like whose primary contribution that particular character was, whether it was like primarily Garland or primarily Boyle. But my suspicion based on how it was written is it seemed like an atheist's take on what a religious person would say, which is to say not really great.
Now,
The name of the actor who played Mark Strong. That was it. His Pinbecker's diet. Like, so just to sum up, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth. My take on the third act is everything was foreshadowed up to that point. It technically paid off everything you'd been waiting for. There's so many references, first and even in the second act, of where this was going. They heard the transmission from Icarus 1. You had a little bit of video of some Pinbecker saying odd things, and you got little up to when they are actually on Icarus 1, and you have the audio, I believe it, audio and video playing, and Mace goes, anybody understand any of that? So it can be really tough to like portray a crazy character in a way that makes sense. I thought that just the approach to that, it really did not land. Even though it like technically thematically fulfilled everything, in my opinion, just the execution really lacked. I thought the twist of, oh, this captain has been out there for 6.5 years just looking at the sun and, to his mind, communing with God, and you've got Searle talking about unknown psychological effects of being this close to the sun or staring at the sun. You've got the references to eyes, and when Searle's first in the observation room, they're 36 miles away from the sun, and he has to go up, I think it's to 4% or something like that. And Icarus 2 is like exposure at this this percentage would cause irreversible damage, but you can take 3.1% for about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then in great attention to detail, you can see Searle over the course of the film. It's implied that he keeps returning to the observation room because you can like see his skin get blistered and you see him picking at things. So you've got the makeup implying things that are going on even though you don't see it, but it's perfectly in keeping with everything else that's going on.
They took some interesting routes, and I'll jump back to the science bit for a second, because first of all, when a sun is dying, it actually expands.
Yeah.
So technically the Earth would actually feel warmer, not cooler. But you have to make a movie.
Yeah.
And there were some parts I really loved. The concept of the shield itself, I thought, was executed brilliantly. The gold color of their spacesuits is actually how you would design those suits. It's the most reflective. But there was other things, like it was a great idea to have like the first Icarus, when they get inside of it, there's dust everywhere, and I think it's Searle that points out it's human skin.
Yeah, 80% of all dust is human skin.
Yeah, that's how that line goes. Which
foreshadowing.
Yeah, and great line. And it was a great detail to add to it. But here's a dude that is essentially getting the world's strongest suntan for the last 7 years. Is he either going to have tough, knotty skin and probably loads of cancer, or is he going to have no skin, which is how he's portrayed in this movie? I mean, in all likelihood, the way that would boil out is he would have a lot of skin and a lot of just this epic tangoing and scar tissue and everything else. But it's this, and
he's kind of goopy.
He's goopy, and that's where the movie also kind of takes it into another weird place, like how they eventually defeat him was. It was a little bit gross, which is cool, but it didn't make any sense whatsoever that this guy who's wiping out the crew is basically dissolving before their eyes.
Yeah, so a detail I picked up on my third playthrough is like it doesn't, and I would lay a lot of the blame just on stylistic decisions made by the director. But you don't really see Pinbecker until he's just this vague silhouette in the viewing room on Icarus 2, which is when Kappa discovers him and finds out that he is Pinbecker. And then Pinbecker slashes him with a little vibro knife, and Kappa cranks up the percentage of the filter in the viewing room. And I believe that's what burns him. So he may have been, say, like, tanned or like as one with a lot of sun exposure would have been. I think that's what actually like burns him at that point. Which
except Kappa was in the room too.
That is true. He ran out immediately, but it seemed like that was the implication there, but it wasn't clear, and still is not clear. And
but you got to make a movie happen. I can't criticize any film for messing up on a detail here or there. Again, I think the ultimate effect of having the dust in the spaceship was awesome.
Yeah,
that part was great. Then when they're exploring it, and they show this unchecked growth by one of the crew member, this whiny guy who's like second in command up until a
Harvey.
point. Harvey, yeah, who should have been played by David Schwimmer. That's what that character.
Oh wow, I hadn't thought of that.
Looked like, acted like. I mean, yeah.
Second in command, Ross Geller.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple scenes where he's like, it looks like about ready to cry. You know, he's so emotionally hurt. If
it's not too, we'll get back to that. But yeah, slight rabbit trail there. Even like the consistency in the writing on that, like the. Brian Cox wrote, or either him or one of the other science advisors on there wrote backstories for the characters, and Harvey's character, which makes sense as you watch it to an extent, but then once you know even just a little bit of backstory makes a lot more sense. He was, of all the crew, the one who wanted to go home the most.
Harvey was?
Harvey was. Ooh. Yeah. So like when they're first viewing Mercury, he's the only one that has his head down. During that, not wondering at what's going on, but then like once you know, he wants to go wants to go home. He's the one.
And then when the ship is damaged and they've got to fix it, and they said, well, in order to fix it, we got to fry a couple of the antennas, and he's losing his mind over the fact we need that to when we get back. And Cassie just says, we'll deal with that when we get there.
Yeah. Need that get back. Or even what struck me as odd the first time I watched it was when he's ordering Kappa to get out of the suit so he can be the one. He's like, I'm second in command. I have to go back. That because he really wanted to return home. Or even just from a writing standpoint, as they're exploring the ship, he's the one who discovers the oxygen garden and is hopeful. And then it cuts to blanking on Michelle Yeoh's name. Yeah. He finds the oxygen, like, it's overgrown, there's plenty of oxygen, and then it cuts to her being quite happy at that, because she cares about the growing things, as we saw when the oxygen farm was on fire. She rushes into it, even trying to get into the inferno that was the oxygen garden. You see how much that meant to her, and then after that, and then
she doesn't even necessarily like people per se that much.
No, she's
like Mace's talking to her, and she's just says, shut up, flyboy.
Shut up.
And when it's time to decide make some big choices as to who needs to live and die, she's just like, kill him.
Yeah. She's also the one that brings up the concept. Is like, well, he said there's not enough oxygen for us to get there, but that's not true. There's not enough oxygen for all of us to get there. It's like, ooh, okay. She was the one who brought that up because she cares more about saving the Earth and the growing things than the people that are on there, which is a very consistent throughout. And when while casting the film, when she auditioned, Danny Boyle offered her any of the roles. It's like, we'll gender and race swap any of them, you get to pick whichever role you want to do. And she picked the one that seemed best to her, but her audition was so good that he gave her, any of these 8 roles are yours if you want them. And she did a damn good job in the
and one we were discussing this earlier too, that there's a good range of diversity in this casting, but it wasn't just random. It served purpose. That this is an international mission. Here's the more prominent countries contributing their best and brightest, so to speak, and so that's who's flying the ship.
Yeah, it was definitely not. So I mean, the story motivated reason behind that, it wasn't just we need diversity, which I think is not the best creative decision, just diversity for the sake of itself. If it fits the story and fits the world, then absolutely. So why Kaneda was Japanese, Yeoh is Chinese, and Wong is Chinese as well. It was based on projections they made at the time. They sort of like estimated what countries might still be in power at this time, or be what, but they wanted an international cast, since this is an Earth mission to the sun. It's not an American mission to the sun, and they wanted a bit more world representation. But then Boyle's like, well, but we can't just do one of each. That seems a bit arbitrary. So they diversified it enough to imply that without going crazy with the diverse casting, which
use your words.
Appreciate it. Yeah, words not much good today.
Movie fantastic and fun and everything else. The science was hit or miss. I have a feeling I have a friend I grew up with who's now a xenoastrobiologist, and she probably wants to slap me right now for mistitling her professorship. But I'm sure she'd be losing her mind if she had seen this movie and has been screaming about the all of the incorrect things that are occurring in this.
Yeah, but a number of
on the surface, it's a very good attempt.
Yeah. The gravity being in one scene tied to air pressure, because when they get back in the broken airlock, when Kappa and Mace get back in, and Harvey ricochets off out into space. As soon as he gets pressurized, they fall to the ceiling, which is, of course, ridiculous. I mean, it at least it wasn't arbitrary. It was, okay, we're going to tie this moment to when the air pressure comes back on. So that's at least somewhat motivated, even if completely ridiculous. But yeah, as I suspected, what Boyle said in regard to, say, like the scientific criticisms of this was that just in space, it either has to be 100% about the gravity or not. If you make the decision to go with realistic gravity, everything revolves around that, and it's an absolute nightmare. You have to spend months getting, like, we can do it believably. And this was back in 2027, or he mentioned, I think it was like 2001 is when they started doing like zero G weightlessness a certain way, which was consistent up until Alfonso Cuarón did Gravity in 2013, and just kind of used the actor's face and just did visual effects for most of the rest of it. And the Gravity is much more realistic.
I gotta argue with you on that one. I had a hard time. There's a couple scenes in there where you see Sandra Bullock and she's just trying to wave her arms and pretend she's sitting up there. It was a very good attempt, and that movie was very ambitious. Whether I would say that was the next step or the next evolution of how to shoot a space movie,
well,
as far as the Gravity goes, I don't know.
Referenced an astronaut speaking about the film who had been in actual space and said he found it believable.
Well, okay, then the astronaut overrides me. Fine, I'm out.
But yeah, still, even that, it's not obviously it like captured the feeling of it, but not per se the literal thing. Because generally, zero G is portrayed as very slow moving, or at least just something to visually communicate the lack of gravity. But he said when you actually see someone in space, it is either at normal speed or even faster because there's less resistance. So when you see someone actually working in a zero G environment, it doesn't look right to the eye. So, and as always, it's a balance between, well, what's real and what looks correct. Or as Spielberg said on in Jaws, it's not about reality, it's about believability. So it's less about what's literally true or literally happens and more about what can be accepted in the suspension of disbelief.
The cryo liquid for the computer. Poor Mace. They're determined to kill him by freezing him. He gets frozen outside. He barely handles that event, and then it's like literally 5 to 10 minutes later, he's freezing to death in the computer's coolant.
Deep diving repeatedly into the coolant, and they set that up with the drops the wrench in and grabs it out, and you can see how much that hurts. But that was a great end to that character, because even though he's very black and white, but also pretty darn emotional, a very, very short fuse, but you had him basically going to kill Trey.
Yeah, he played a brigand in this through the entire thing. He had his orders, he had his logic, and he was going to carry it through no matter what. Yeah,
whatever the consequences. But then in the end, that same thing, which led him to be a real dick to other characters at times and try to usurp authority, and he was just really an asshole throughout, very, very black and white. But then that black and whiteness also led him to a very self-sacrificial act, which is like, well, this is what has to happen, so it's what I'm going to do. And it wasn't even a decision for him. He just did it because that was the thing to do. So yeah, I really liked how they handled his character throughout. He wasn't just the hothead. He was very intelligent and quick to make decisions, but it was most of the time the right decision.
Yeah, it was just heartless, especially in the execution.
Yeah, very, very cold logic. But Chris Evans did a fantastic. I believe he's a really good actor. He hasn't had a tremendous amount of stuff to work with recently, but a solid actor who definitely goes for it. And yeah, I don't remember to what extent, but he actually was going into very cold liquid on set. So like toward the end when he's talking to Kappa and like shivering and chattering, that's actually real. He's not acting that, because he had been in and out of cold liquid repeatedly. So he's actually shivering, which is a very commendable commitment to the role.
Yeah. listening to some directors, the ones that like to push the science and the science fiction, that kind of thing, James Cameron. And some of these shots kind of reminded me of when he did that underwater flick that he's
The Abyss.
The Abyss, which he's both well known for and well hated for how he put his crew through that. And just literally tortured them. At one point, it was talked about how the cast literally just like tore their hotel rooms apart because they were just so stressed out. They just had lost their minds. They felt like they were drowning repeatedly. James Cameron himself nearly died on set.
Yep.
He got
Yeah.
locked into the bottom of this tank and he couldn't get up. And two people were trying to like help him, but they were making it worse. And of course, James Cameron being James Cameron, when after that event was over, he fired both those people.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Yeah, I heard that he got stuck underwater and was like trying to get up because he needed oxygen. The other people were trying to help him out. And yeah, I think he got taken to the ER, but he was back on set in, it was like 4 or 6 hours or something like that, ready
live
to go.
Fire on that set. One of the last few times directors used live gunfire.
Oh wow, that
And this is coming from the same guy who says now the guns are horrible in movies and should never be there. This is a guy who invented the pulse rifle in alien movies and used live fire on his set. So
so
keep going.
Aliens, James. Terminator, True Lies, guns are evil, but somehow bows. I mean, if it's got a string and you pull it.
Hey, as long as that bow and
immoral.
arrow shoots actually through an entire spaceship that traveled across the universe, hey, you know, that's the same thing. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, the shots in there seem to line up the same, and I don't think he tortured his crew, or I don't think that Danny Boyle tortured his people nearly on the level that James Cameron did. But it had the same feel, and it was this same sci-fi, cramped, enclosed, set and area for all these actors to have to work from, and that alone has got to be more stressful too. When your job is to act and to telegraph what you're trying to convey, but you have no room to do it, and even the audio is going to be more weird because of echo and cramped conditions. Where am I going with this? I'm not sure, but the look felt very similar to me.
Yeah,
I don't ramble.
No, not. No ADHD going on in either case here.
Where my meds go?
I think I saw a butterfly. And it just add to that one solid directing touch that I thought was good was when Hiroyuki Sanada, his character Kaneda, dies. They, on the day of his last scene, he pretty much left set. I mean, not immediately, but he either left that day or the day after. So they didn't have him say goodbye. So you can see in the performances his absence there, because he'd been there through the 6 week of prep and the 3 months of or he wasn't there the whole 3 months, but significant portion of the shooting. But once his character died, the director had him just leave immediately. So without giving him a send off, just to add to now the actors are feeling this friend that they'd been working with for months now was suddenly gone, so that would show in the performance. So that's a really solid touch of directing, and speaks to Boyle's competence as a director. He's done some superb work. So
on that line of thought, then, why did the third act just royally totally bomb? I mean, whether the writing decisions and whoever was in charge of that, it still was the execution in this. Just
so that's what really off put me. So yeah, I mean the first 2/3 or so of the film is, I mean, even as I listened to a short audio clip of Quentin Tarantino talking about this, just said the first 2/3 of it are a masterclass in suspense. It just, with how it maybe just the initial writing was so good they couldn't pull it together in the end, even though they technically did. But there is so much that is absolutely masterful about this, that it just, to me, it was primarily a stylistic thing. So I don't mind they think the captain still being alive was a brilliant touch. Him sort of going crazy, being so close to the sun. I thought that really worked. Didn't care for his dialogue. I thought that was clumsy, and there wasn't enough of his character prior to that to say, well, why did he end up in a religious place unless there was something
Yeah,
before that?
no one really understands or gets it. He's
Yeah,
just
because I've
crazy guy on ship.
known people kind of actually kind of similar to that, and that's like close to how they talk, but not really. So it just is odd that the captain would have ended up at that place, and there isn't really a reason given as to why he is that way. But
And they never explain, like, did he kill everyone on that crew, or did they? Because there's a scene where they're like looking at the observation
yeah,
deck,
they've
and
got
that
all the ash statues
ash statues are there, but
designed after the Mount Vesuvius victims in
Pompeii.
Pompeii.
Yeah. But they don't really talk about, like, did he trap him in the room? Did they just decide to do it because the ship failed in some way? But the ship isn't failing anymore. They think they can move it, except that they just kind of go down this rabbit hole and they never come back from it.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, what was understandable to me is the conclusion that the captain reached, which I don't know why he would choose to stay alive and then or kill everybody else and stay alive, or if everybody else killed themselves and somehow he stay alive. But just thinking, if he's in the Icarus One, he thinks he's humanity's last hope, unless somehow he knew that we had a second payload we were able to send if that one failed, but because that's never addressed, which is odd given how well cross-referenced this film is. So him staying alive, and then what he says, which is basically God has decided that that humanity is done and we all need to go to heaven. Basically, his motivation is who are we to try to stop what God is doing? The sun is dying. Clearly, it's our time to be over, and it's arrogant of us to try to continue to live when God has decided that we would die. But then he stays alive, and for reasons that aren't really explained, or I didn't really pick up on. And then he has this very, very, very basic. It really seems, I mean, lazy in my perspective. Just like, oh, we're everything, all our wants, all our dreams are nothing. We're just dust, and to dust we will return. It's just very, very basic, not particularly like clever or profound, and I'm not not being either of those things at the moment.
It's a waste of a good actor too. I mean, Mark Strong, he plays a villain in so many movies. The first Sherlock Holmes, he was
Blackwood,
and in like 10,000 other movies. If you need a British villain, he's one of the go-tos.
Yeah, another actor that wasn't all that well known at the time that has since become. I mean, he's been in like every other movie
at this point, especially Kingsman. He's been in those, and gosh, just so many. And I think a number of Danny Boyle movies, actually. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check that.
Yeah, Boyle wanted him particularly for that, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
So why did the movie fail?
So they
I know,
like references. It was influenced by other films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien. Definitely, Alien was pretty successful. But as we were talking about this, we mentioned there's one other space one. But when you
there was Solaris, which was
Solaris. There's the Tarkovsky's 72 Solaris, which I haven't seen, and then the. A big reason Sunshine didn't get funding was the box office flop of was it George Clooney Solaris a few years before that?
Oh, I remember 2001. That thing. I mean, I don't want to remember that thing, but I remember that thing.
Yeah, that flopped hard. Haven't seen either of those, but that's the reason why Fox Searchlight didn't fully fund the film, and Boyle had to seek the rest of the funds elsewhere. Was Searchlight or Fox's lack of confidence in the viability, which, was a justified lack of confidence in how hard it flopped at the box office. But
it had everything working for it too. So whoever decided went, I don't think it's going to do good. I guess it was a good call. I'm surprised by that.
Still lost money on it though. But it can be really difficult. And this is a a thing that was mentioned like in my writing education as I was learning how to do things is like often when you get to sort of the end, you can set up a bunch of philosophical things or really big important things, and it tends to be like sci-fi or aliens or something cosmic. Since there's a lot we actually don't know, and I mean there's questions that have plagued humanity for as long as we have history, and big questions we still don't have answer for. It's really difficult to say tie it all together in any type of meaningful way. And I think Sunshine does it better than others I've seen and heard of. In that, as I've said, just like technically they do. It ends on a hopeful note, or referencing the message that Kappa sent back in the beginning. Is like, so if you wake up one morning and it's a particularly beautiful day, you'll know that we succeeded. And after payload flies into the sun, we cut to a scene in near Sydney with his sister that he sent the message to, and you see it's a particularly beautiful day. So it implies that they succeeded, even though everyone there died. But
and it doesn't show any like kaboom, and there's no like epicness to it. Blah, words. It was just this poignant, soft, hey, you succeeded, and a little has changed, but not anything truly terribly noticeable. At least in that closing.
Yeah, I thought that, like the
beautiful
end scene there, I thought was fantastic. They didn't need to do more. And Boyle referenced we could have done it any of these other ways, but he chose to do that one, so that was great. But so Mark Strong or Pinbecker's dialogue pretty weak and just odd that it would be that way, and I think that was off-putting enough to where people not necessarily missed what the point was. Like I said, I think we both grasped the point pretty easily. Just the style of it, how kind of the reveal of Pinbecker's existence was handled, at least for me, because you had the airlock break, you find out it was released manually, and then later Icarus 2 said that there's 5 crew members on board instead of 4. And then Kappa goes to investigate the observation room where you see Pinbecker looking at the sun, and he asks him if he's an angel, which sort of makes sense because he's been alone for 6.5 years and isn't quite sure what's going on.
And then it turns into Scream.
Yeah, and it just does what every slasher film does. When you're like, okay, what do you do when you have one character dead set on killing everybody else? How do you keep that happening at a certain pace?
One thing we both agree on, though, is how they visually decide to display Pinbecker. Once that they spawn, they do this weird like Bourne Identity camera shake on the character.
Really shaky,
and
very
the scene
blurred. You never really. So the Cinema Wins guy pointed this out in his video. It's kind of like we similar to viewing the sun. You can't really look at it. It's blurred and distorted, and this is a character who's been warped and distorted by the sun. So stylistically, it was we can't really look at him in a sense, because he referenced him as like being the devil and God is the sun. To me, he's just a man that just ended up at sort of a being close to the sun, and seeing his own insignificance just sort of resulted to nihilism. Like you said, when we're gone, there'll be
nothing more,
nothing to show that we were ever here except stardust. So
he goes to nihilism, but he doesn't do anything about himself.
He
just wants to hang out and talk to the sun. It's a weird decision to go with that. Now, if they'd even had like put a little bit more into the ship was disabled, or if they did talk about like some backstory as to what happened to the crew and to the ship, like was it Pinbecker from the get-go, or was it a series of other events, or was it another crew initially? You could have done a lot with that. So, but they didn't.
No, devil's advocate, I did like that. I believe this was also the Cinema Wins video, but this is something I'd been thinking about before. He talks about so you have this character who's looking into the sun, and it's God, the sun is dying. God has decided that we will die, and there's if you read the Bible and are familiar with that, there's the flood, which is where God decides all but 8 people and a few animals die. and then references to Armageddon and next time the world will pass away in fire. So there's this guy takes like God as just decides that life shall end, and that's fine. But in the end, it's this one man's decision whether or not that actually happens, because the payload worked. At least the second one, which implies that the Icarus 2's payload worked, which implies that Icarus 1's payload would have worked, and had he not apparently made the decision to stop, then the sun would have been reignited and humanity would have been saved. So it implies that it's not this arbitrary God that decides whether we live or die. It's the humanity striving into the unknown, making the decision to try to continue, that saves us. So we sort of participate in our own salvation. We're not this insignificant thing. We're small in the scale of the universe, but our self-sacrificial actions for the greater good can save us, as it were. And I love the scene where I forget Michelle Yeoh's character's name. I got everybody else's, but Corazon. There we go. Corazon. Yeah, she goes into the burnt out oxygen farm and finds one little sprout that was growing after all that.
And she's losing her mind over that thing, which wouldn't have made enough air to keep a mouse alive for a day. But you have her, and then he comes up or Pinbacker comes up and stabs her in the back. There's a lot of symbolism in this, but yeah, in the end, it was his choice, the choice of a man that would have dictated whether or not humanity lived or died, which would be in keeping with Garland's atheism. But so back rabbit trailing back to the stylistic decision, that it just was very, very off-putting. So it's not the theme, it's not the, say, script structure decisions. It's just very unpleasant to look at. The sound design became very grating. So it just was unpleasant, but not in a way that really... It wasn't... It was more off-putting than compelling, to sum up. The really shaky shots on Pinbacker, grating sound design... other bad shots in there too. The editing, when they're sliding down the side of the bomb and they're being chased, and they do this fast motion and freeze, and then fast motion and freeze. That was annoying.
So that probably weird that I forgot about that, but that probably more than anything else. I don't know if so it wasn't just the video I was watching. I thought it was. I have a digital copy of it. I thought it was an error with just the particular one I had. But yeah, just they're sliding, and there's not random, but these freeze frames as they are sliding and then just stop. I'm guessing, or it seemed that you're implying that time is kind of jumping a little bit as they're getting closer, but it
doesn't work that way though.
No.
It just feels like this poorly chosen, overly stylized, bad way of portraying that event.
It seemed like something back when I was studying filmmaking, I thought would be a good idea, but then I'd look at it and go, oh no, that doesn't work, and I'd try something else. Or even the just brief flickering frames of the faces of the crew members of Icarus 1 as they step into the ship. There's, I think, 4 total. They step into the ship and you just have these quick flashes of faces from the crew from
the lens flare of their flashlights.
It doesn't, given how immersive everything else was, those just completely, at least for me, broke immersion. And stylistic choices that highly drew attention to themselves as opposed to supporting the story. I think I see what he was going for, but it took me out of the film harshly right when I needed to be most invested in it. So yeah, I'm glad I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, that very, very off-putting and immersion breaking.
So I mean, a couple funny side things, I guess maybe. Cassie, who does more
Roseburn.
She's just more kind of creeping around the ship. Every time Kappa has a nightmare, he wakes up in a cold sweat, and she's just sitting there going, another nightmare. Huh?
Surface up the sun again. It's like,
and I get where they're coming from. That she's this emotional bond for Kappa, but it didn't
Yeah.
come across as
Is it?
that as much as she was just this character that's always upset at everyone and obsessed with Kappa. That was really about it. Yeah.
Good writing on her character, though.
Good
She
writing on her
did
character. Yeah.
a damn good job. Yeah. It the initial viewing didn't make sense to me why she was the only one who voted against sacrificing Trey or against Mace sacrificing Trey. That didn't make sense until I read what her backstory was, which was she wanted to go, she wanted to be on this mission, and was pregnant at the time, but had an abortion specifically to be able to go on this mission. So to me, that makes sense of she, her being the only vote against killing Trey. Like, just
Just
that
losing
made
more
sense to
life.
me. Yeah, she'd already sacrificed a life, made the no unintentional pro-life messaging here, but it chose to sacrifice the life of her child to go on this mission to save humanity. She'd already made that choice and then just couldn't do it again, didn't want to participate in making the specific choice, which brings up an interesting moral dilemma with the whole setup. Is like, do you sacrifice the one to save the many? And it's one thing when it's just going to incidentally happen, like they at least towards the beginning, it seems to be implied that they will make a return trip. You've got
Yeah.
Corazone's line. It's like, well, good news. We've got enough oxygen to get there in a quarter of the way back already, which the implication there seems to be that it's hopeful that we'll be able to return home.
Well, and Harvey talking about the antennas too.
Yeah, Harvey talking about the antennas and his wanting to get back to the ship.
So why not pick up the bomb if your first bomb fails? So you're on your way back, then you grab the other bomb and you go back again, or you just radio and say, "Hey, okay, guys, we found another bomb." You know, and also they make it very clear that the thing won't fire and won't detonate without Kappa. So the entire mission is completely critical on Kappa surviving the trip there. So they don't. This is the most amazing AI that's supposed to be on the ship, but no one can arm or launch this sucker when they approach the Corona.
That did strike me as odd. Maybe it was a detail I missed,
Somehow
but it
mentioned somewhere, but I didn't
seemed
pick it up.
strange that he had to be the one to go and arm the payload manually.
And if that is the case, then for Mace to have volunteered Kappa was him risking the entire crew, which goes against everything that Mace was supposed to stand for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
good point.
I guess a takeaway from me for this is SpaceX needs to psych eval all their astronauts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody needs to a psych eval.
It's too late for that.
Yeah,
but-
probably, unfortunately.
So yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I think the movie was very poignant. It was brilliantly done, and one of the better movies up until that third act that I remember seeing for a long time.
Yeah, one of these days I'm gonna have a day where I remember names, and it's gonna scare the hell out of me. But yeah, I was gonna reference an actor who read the script, and I'm stalling, hoping that I'll remember his Oscar Isaac. There we go, it worked. Oscar Isaac had read this script and really tried to audition for it. He ended up not getting picked for it, but he called it the best script he had ever read at that time, and that was a big driving force behind him being cast in Ex Machina, which is also written by Alex Garland, also words. So that's why Oscar Isaac was in that, because he pushed hard for that. He wanted to be involved in an Alex Garland script. But I kind of agree with him up till the stylistic and dialogue style and dialogue choices at the third act. I think it is a brilliant script. It introduces its themes very well. The characters are well realized, or
It shows progression,
well written,
and everything. Yeah,
evolved. There are so many subtle details. I kind of lost track of the amount of details I was trying to put down. If I would do a longer, say like EFAP or Mahler style breakdown, we could spend a while on this, but I'm not near that discipline.
those are YouTubers, by the way. So yeah,
Hopefully, yeah.
yeah.
That's not name dropping if they don't know you exist, but anyway, yeah, absolutely superb first act. So much foreshadowing, so much is set up. The second, like the escalation during the second act being extremely organic. It wasn't even like, to reference Gravity. The break into the first or out of the first act was the meteor shower that tore the station apart. So it was an external thing that happened, and some writing instructors say have different ideas about what the first act break should be, or break into the second act. Some are, well, it needs to be a decision that the character, an irrevocable decision that the character makes, and others are like, well, it should be something that happens to the character that's completely outside of their control, that then they have to react to. But I really appreciated, just for how I choose to write things, the situation, it's decisions made by the characters. The signal from the Icarus One is received, and I think well explained as to why they hadn't reached the signal before, because they have referenced the solar winds are blocking things, which is why they have to send the messages back, and Mace isn't able to send his, but now that they're closer, they're picking up the signal, so that is at least organic. So the receiving the signal is external but completely organic and motivated. But then the decisions that are made, you've got Harvey's the one who discovers it, brings it up to the group. Searle is presenting the case as to why they might go get the second payload. You have Mace being, no, it's very clear the only option is to continue going. We don't want to see if there's anybody alive. But then the decision is off put onto Kappa, the physicist, in a great bit of writing. Kaneda, the captain, decides, well, Kappa's going to be the one to decide, and he just sits there and goes,
it's not a democracy. We're a collection of scientists and astronauts.
I'm going to make the most informed decision possible, and Kappa will make it, and he's just like, shit. Which is a great line. I mean,
that's a good reaction.
A really good reaction. And then he goes and tries to get the computer. The computer at one point stops the simulations. Like, any projection beyond this is pointless because we literally don't know. And Kaneda asks him for a decision. He's like, well, it's a guess at best. And then he's just like, well, 2 chances are better than 1, and the decision is made. And then it's human error that I love the dichotomy of our complete, the whole mission is we need to restart the sun, but the entire mission they're fighting with the slightest little error is pretty much instant death or destruction because of the sun. So the contrast of our complete dependence on it for life on Earth, and then just how deadly it is up close. I love that contrast throughout, and just the little thing that Trey forgot to do, which is to adjust the angle of the shield, gets them in the situation. And then they reference the comm towers will be destroyed, as even if the shield was in proper position, and then a reflection off of the comms tower sets the oxygen garden on fire, which that part is a little bit contrived, but it's still organic and referenced. And then just how many motivated character decisions happen in that whole sequence, whether it's Mace volunteering Kappa, and then him choosing to actually be the one to go, which was set up in their fight beforehand. And then Mace is like, oh, here's what we need to do, backed up by the captain. Just so many decisions happening throughout. I like that everything stayed motivated, and there were as few plot contrivances
Mace
as possible.
The garden on fire completely. Again, Mace is always
yep.
the one doing the jerk move that must be done. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that ended up being the right thing to do. Just like, well, we're going to lose the whole thing. It's like, well, we've already lost it, so it'll burn itself out. That's just the quick black and white decision. It's like, well, this is what has to happen. This is what has to happen.
And showing Corazon in that hallway with flames licking absolutely everywhere, and she's on the ground screaming and crying. That was an amazing shot.
What a great shot. And interesting similarities there, and with the first time we like actually see Pinbecker, because he's in the observation room with the sun behind him just overwhelming him, and then you have the shot, a very similar shot of her with fire destroying the oxygen garden, which was sort of like representation of the hope of Earth and new life, and in addition to them depending on it. But yeah, I think I tried to sum up, but started rambling. So to sum up, third act does, I believe, thematically fulfill everything that was set up before. It just off-putting stylistic decisions and insufficient dialogue that just like, it's like, well, it's there, but I'm really surprised it didn't go through another draft or two to try to pull it together in a more palatable way.
So walking away from this movie, what do you give it 1 out of 10?
1 out of 10. Ooh, that is... I think overall, given, I mean, like, it's rare for me to be able to rewatch something repeatedly. I think I'd give it like an 8, if not an 8.5. I think there's enough outstanding, good, very well written, well everything in this to give it a solid 8. And even though I disagree with what were deliberate choices, I don't think it was flaws per se. The dialogue definitely, and his Pinbecker's character, I would say, is a flaw, but I can more easily forgive stylistic decisions than, say, flaws. So I'd give it a solid 8, soft 8.5. It's an excellent film, and I will be rewatching it in the future.
Yeah, 7 or 8, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's so much of that, and for me, it was more of the first act that carried me through the rest of the movie. A lot of the emotional stuff and the more of the ties that bind the characters together appears in the second act. But for whatever reason, it was all about the first act for me. The setup, the execution, the photography, the music, all of it. Just,
I will say,
it's so good.
Definitely, I talk in superlatives quite a bit, but it's absolutely true in this case. Definitely one of the best first acts of a movie that I have seen. Just absolutely brilliant and extremely effective, very well paced, excellent everything.
Yeah. So call it there.
Yeah. Call it there at the risk of rambling on various rabbit trails for
the next 2
much
hours.
Longer.
Yeah.
But really enjoyed this one, and looking forward to the next one. Hopefully this was at least somewhat entertaining.
A way to kill the dead silence that might be around a person. So, whatever. Whatever.
If you need sound in the silence of whatever vacuum you happen to be in, hopefully.
All right, let's finish now,
all right. And
scene.